You know, as a biblical historian, and this is one of the things I want to explain to you tonight, we're also launching our ministry. Our ministry is to bring the Bible alive, to tell you that you can trust it, that these things are real. So when you open the Bible and you see Joseph and Jacob, do you know there's archaeological proof for all these people? There's evidence. It's in the ground. We have been there. But before I get into telling you about this timeline, I have to explain something. First of all, there are two chronologies. There is the old chronology, which doesn't work anymore. And that's because the timeline is wrong. First of all, you're probably of an age when you know this film. This is the Ten Commandments. We have Yul Brynner as Ramesses the Great. Now, if you open any book, most books, you will find that Ramesses the Great is the Pharaoh of Exodus. That's rubbish. It never, ever worked. And the reason why it doesn't work is because he's in the wrong time period. And then people, skeptics, then turn this around and say, oh, you silly Christians, look, your timeline's wrong. He wasn't the Pharaoh. And they use that either as a block to stop from believing that the Bible is true, or otherwise they use it to attack us. There's a whole pile of these things. And let's have a listen to this a second, because you're going to like this. I'm going to play a little trick on you. In your Bible, you probably have...
Let my people go!
The slaves are mine. Their lives are mine. All that they own is mine.
Your Bible probably says, let my people go. Well, that's not what it says in the original Hebrew. It's actually a commandment. Either send my people away, or I command them to go. It's not let my people go. But the film has influenced our Bibles. You should be surprised the number of Bibles have got let my people go. And it's actually in quite a number of documents you'll see. Charlton Heston as Moses and Yul Brynner. This film has actually done quite a lot of damage, really, over the years. So the old chronology puts the Exodus between 1134 and 13 BC. There's a bit of a dispute about this. Some people put it a lot earlier and a lot later. The new chronology, and by the way, the new chronology isn't set up by Christians. This has actually been set up by secular historians. And one of the leading lights in that is a guy called David Rohl. Now, David Rohl, when he started to learn Egyptologist, he's an Egyptologist. He started looking at the timeline and thought, hang on, this is not right. There's something wrong. And it wasn't just the Egyptian chronology. It was other chronologies, other civilizations. It just didn't work. There was gaps. And they've invented gaps to get things to work. The problem is, you get so many gaps and so many, oh, that doesn't quite work, but we'll fit that in. It gets to the point where it gets a mess, and it is a mess at the moment. So a new chronology based on, and this is where it gets interesting. David Rohl, he was an agnostic, actually believes the Bible is true as a historical book, which is quite astonishing. A lot of historians are now looking to the Bible for dates because it's historically correct. It's like a lot of other ancient documents, except we've just got a lot more copies. So, the new chronology, a guy called Dutymos, who you probably never heard of, is the pharaoh of the 13th dynasty, and its Exodus is 1447 BC. Now, it could be a few years either side of that. It can't be absolutely, but it's probably that date. And I'll explain as we go along why this works so well. Come to the next little problem of chronology. This is Catherine Kenyon. Now, on the right-hand side, that's Jericho. And she excavated it in the 1950s. And she dated Jericho, and she's right. Okay, there's no doubt that this is the date for the destruction of Jericho, between 1400 and 1350 BC. Well, under the Old Chronology, Joshua arrives in the Promised Land, and guess what? Hang on, Jericho's already destroyed. So is the story true? And a lot of historians will point this out to you and say, Jericho was already destroyed. Your history's wrong. So you've got a problem. So how do you explain it? With the new chronology, you get that. Jericho was destroyed between 1400 and 1350 BC, and Joshua actually arrives 40 years after the Exodus at 1407 BC. Therefore, who destroyed Jericho? Joshua. So that's where we're going from. And on our new website, which has just gone up, we're going to be putting films up, we're going to be putting timelines up, so you can use this information and these clips of films, you can take them back to your church, you can take them and show your friends, and these will help you to evangelize and help out yourselves. Because if your faith is strengthened, because you can then say, well, actually, Moses and Exodus is true. So, how does this all start for Israel? Well, it's Abraham. These are the promises. These are the covenant. Yet you will be a father of many nations, and I, God, will establish my covenant between you and your seed. And I will give to you and your seed after you the land, all of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. He actually repeats that to Isaac. Now, I can't prove, and archaeologically speaking, that Abraham existed. I can't prove that Jacob existed. But I can prove that Joseph actually existed. Joseph is really well known. This is the Pharaoh of Joseph's time. Now, you may not be able to see this, but unlike most pharaohs, his ears are forward. He has worry lines. Why? Because he's worried, because there's a famine coming. So he's telling the people, I am concerned about you. Now, there's a city in Goshen, because the Bible says they settled in Goshen. Manfred Bietek, who is a very famous Austrian archaeologist, has been excavating in Goshen. Today they found this city. It's called Avaris. In your Bible, it's called Ramesses. Because that's the best way of putting this. Right, if I said to you, let's all go to Cleveland, you'd all go, but Derek, it's called Gloucester. But in the Roman period, it was called Cleveland. And what happened in the Bible, originally it was called Avaris, and then later additions, to point out where it was, they called it Ramesses. But Ramesses was built on top of Avaris. Now then, this is a reconstruction. This is the only pyramid tomb at this period that's not for a pharaoh. And guess who was buried there? Joseph. His brothers are all buried there. They've excavated it. And here's the astonishing thing. They found a statue, and this is what the statue looked like originally. This is Joseph. Interesting, he has a throw stick. That throw stick says he's a man of importance. Only a pharaoh would have a throw stick. This says, I am a vizier. He is second in command to Pharaoh. He's got ginger hair. You can actually see it on the original stonework. And here's what makes him somebody from Canaan. This is the interesting part. He has a coat of many colors. No pharaoh has a coat of many colors. When you see any Egyptian original equipment, they're always in white. Okay? If it's an Asiatic, they've got multicolours. There's lots of examples in Egypt. And what makes this so fascinating is when Betek opened up the tomb, it was empty. Not by grave robbers, because what was the promise that Joseph wanted? He wanted to be buried back in the land of Canaan, the promised land. And somebody broke into his tomb and took the bones. Because if you're a grave robber, why would you take bones? It's no good to you. So there you have. There's other archaeological proof of Joseph, and we're going to do a film about Joseph. And we will show you can trust the story. It's astonishing, isn't it? The Bible is real, and here's the guy. Moses. Now then, Exodus. You're probably used to having it, it goes over the Red Sea. No, it doesn't. If you look at the top of here, you can see that there's a sort of a loop on this map. At the top, there's a sea called Yam Suf, the Sea of Reeds. It's not the Red Sea, it's the Sea of Reeds. Of course, we know this one, don't we? Joshua gets into the land. And of course, under the new chronology, it's correct. So I'm going to skip a few. We're not going to go into Judges, but this is Saul and David. Again, you can see the areas that Saul has taken. Now then, is there any written evidence for Saul and David? Yes. This is the actual letter that Saul sent to a pharaoh called Artanarchon. He's the heretic pharaoh. He was the father of Tutankhamun. His queen was Nefertiti. This is a letter from Saul to Artanarchon. So if Saul didn't exist, why is he writing letters? There's the ark. And if you want to go and see that, that's in the British Museum. Astonishing, isn't it? Do you see what I mean about archaeology? When you start to see these proofs, all this comes to life. Here's Solomon. Some people will tell you that Solomon was a small chieftain. He didn't do this and he didn't do that. And actually, the leading archaeologist of Israel today, Finkelstein, doesn't believe in Saul, doesn't believe in David, doesn't believe in Joshua. He doesn't believe it. He thinks the Israelites were Canaanites who just sort of appeared. And they were all just local chieftains. How he can ignore the evidence, I have no idea. So you can see the land that he took. This is the full extent of Solomon's kingdom. And then, unfortunately, after Solomon dies, the kingdom is split in two. Now, I want to come to a little reference. It's in 1 Kings 14, 25 to 26. And the Bible it's the only time in the Bible when a pharaoh is named Shishak. He has been identified with Shoshek. They sound the same, don't they? Actually, this is where it causes the problem. Because a guy called Jean Paulien was looking for Shishak in Egypt, and he found Shoshank. And he went, yes! And the two timelines went bang. And this is how the Old Chronology was formed. Well, it's not Shoshank at all, because it's the wrong age. Actually, be surprised at this, it's Ramesses the Great. Now, you might say, hang on, Ramesses the Great? That doesn't sound like Shishak. I'll explain something. And I have to tell you, you've got to catch on to this. That's not his real name. That's his regal name. His actual proper name is Shisha, or Shishak. Shishak. It's the Greek name is Shisha, and they translate it as Shishak. So if you were in Greece talking about Ramesses the Great, you'd call him Shisha. And in Mesopotamia, he has a different name again, which gets really confusing. So Ramesses the Great is the plunderer, this guy. And actually, when you go to Egypt now, they're over the moon because their hero is Ramesses the Great. And of course, he's not the villain of Exodus anymore. Again. Now, so let's have a look at some evidence of why he can't possibly be Ramesses the Great. In the Bible, it says the Pharaoh and his army were destroyed. Well, in that case, and how come we've got his mummy? That's Ramesses' mummy. Here's a little bit more evidence for you. This is the Moneta stela. Again, you can go and see this. And for those of you who can all read hieroglyphs, right, it goes from right to left, okay? And that's it there. And Israel, that's what that says, Israel, okay? Has laid waste, his seed is no more. And that's a euphemism. Basically, we've suppressed. And what he's saying is, he went up into Israel and he plundered, it's well known, he plundered the temple. The Egyptians know this. How come we don't? So again, here's some evidence. And what's interesting is this confirms that Israel is a real country in 916 BC, because that's when this was made. So there is a country called Israel in 916, and here's the evidence. There's plenty of other evidence out there as well. So here we've got the Babylonian return, because obviously they were all carried away. The first great stones. Again, this is the new chronology. Things get a little bit easier as you get towards Jesus' time. So it's a lot easier. And then the worst part was this Alexander the Great comes in. He conquers the whole area. He does Mesopotamia. He actually goes into northern India, and he takes the whole of the Levant and Egypt in 10 years. It's astonishing. I mean, modern armies couldn't do that. I mean, it is quite an astonishing achievement. Unfortunately, he dies, and there's a big dispute between his generals, and a general called Ptolemy takes over. Interesting enough about Ptolemy, now you've probably been told that the Jews wanted a Greek version of the Bible, and they called it the Septuagint. That's not true. It was a pharaoh called Ptolemy Philadelphia. He is the guy, he wanted to be able to read the Hebrew scriptures. So he got 70 rabbis, and they actually translated it for him. And eventually they translated the whole of the Old Testament. The beauty about that for us is datable. So this is 300 years before Jesus. So all the prophecies for Jesus are there, 300 years beforehand. It's quite powerful evidence. We get to the Roman period. Now, okay, there's a little bit of a dispute here about when Jesus, but generally speaking, most historians think that Jesus was born in about 3 BC. In our film, our Easter film, you'll see it on our website, we've worked it out to be that it's 30 AD he's crucified. And if you go on the website, you can see the evidence for that. Jesus prophesied that there would be the destruction of the temple. Now, you might think this was the worst disaster for the Jews. Actually, it's not at this period, because something worse happens. There's a war, there's 2 wars after AD 70. One is called the Kittos War. That's quite a minor skirmish, really. It's the Bar Kokhba revolt is the worst. According to a Roman historian, Cassius Dio, 580,000 Jews were slaughtered. And that doesn't include men and women. They laid waste. They absolutely destroyed the whole of Judea. They smashed villages to pieces. They took people into slavery and drove the Jews out. There were very few Jews left in the land. And I want to come to something here. This is, I just want to show you this map. You often hear this expression, Palestine. And where does it come from? Well, originally, this was in AD 132, and this is Hadrian, Emperor Hadrian. He renames the province. And originally, it was all the way up there, all the way down here. This was all Syria, Palestina. Okay? It was never a country, by the way. It was a province. All these are provinces. There's no countries in the Roman Empire. Then one of them splits away later on. So it's that size. It's a lot bigger than Israel. So when you say that people say to you that Palestine has been around since the Roman period, rubbish. Even in the Byzantine Empire, which takes over from the Roman Empire, we have Palestina too. It's a province. It's not a country. The Arabs then turn up. They construct the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Now, I call this the Arab period because these are not Muslims. Now, you might be surprised at this. Muhammad dies in 620 AD. You think, oh, well, they're all Muslims. The name Muslim doesn't occur till another 100 years. When you look at all the chronicles of the time, these are Arabs. These are not Muslims. Okay? It's quite important that you know that. Unfortunately, then we come to the Crusader period. And I have to say, we didn't do well. We didn't do well. If you look at the history of the Crusades, as Christians, I think we forgot a few scriptures. It was quite brutal. And actually, the last conquest of Jerusalem, they slaughtered everybody in the city. Men, women, children, goats, donkeys, everything. It was a bloodbath. I won't go through all the various caliphates of Islam because there's quite a few. They were always warring with each other. But I will mention two. The Mamluks are quite interesting because the Mamluks are actually a revolt in Egypt. And these are Christian slaves. It's quite astonishing, isn't it? Christian slaves take over the Islamic Empire. I know. You think, what? But I can tell you now, far more slaves were taken by the Islamic Empire than ever were taken by Western powers. In fact, their Barbary pirates actually raided all the way up the coast of Ireland. They went into Cornwall, they went to Norway, and they were looking for one particular commodity: blonde, blue-eyed girls, because they got the biggest price in the slave markets. The figures, if you ever get the chance, have a look at the figures. When people go on about, obviously slavery is a horrendous thing. But when you look at the figures, the number of people who died on the trip across the Sahara from the African coast, it's horrendous. Absolutely appalling. Of course, nobody ever tells you about that. They always talk about the one going across to Jamaica and the West Indies. Now, here we go. The British Mandate of Palestine. After World War I, the Ottoman Empire was broken up. The League of Nations was formed, and they had a whole series of problems. Two of the problems was the Levant. What do we do with it? It was no longer an Ottoman Empire. That was all gone. They didn't want to give it to Britain, although Britain was actually there already, administrating it. So they came up with this. This is the Mandate for Palestine. Again, it's not a country. It's a mandate. It's an administrative area. And there's actually two. There's two in this document, and I've got a copy of this document. There you can see this is the area that was, and it's practically modern-day Israel, as it turns out. And this is the Emirate of Transjordan, again administered by the British. It was never a country, and I emphasize that because some people will tell you that under the Mandate it was a country. It never was. We come to World War II, and perhaps the most horrendous thing of our human history, the Holocaust. The figures are staggering. You can't imagine to have a machine working, that's the only way you can describe it, to exterminate people. 10 million in this last lot. And why they picked on Jehovah's Witnesses, I have no idea. I've never quite worked that one out. The Romani were terrible. These were gypsies living in Germany and other places. Absolutely, 1.8 million Poles. And look what they did to the Soviet Union. Absolutely horrendous. They literally worked some of those ex-soldiers to death. Terrible. And then we came to the Jews. Some of the stories I've heard. We were in Amsterdam recently, and we went to the Anne Frank Museum. And if you ever get the chance to go to Amsterdam, please do go to the Anne Frank. You get inside and you realize just how people were on tender hooks all the time. You can't go to the toilet because you can't flush the loo because somebody might hear you. You have to do it at night. You have to walk around not wearing shoes because if you make a creak on the floor, somebody might hear it. And you're like that for 2 years. They lived like that. And then they were betrayed. Nobody knows who betrayed them, but somebody did. And what I didn't know was that Anne was 2 weeks away from being rescued by the British. She died. Otto Frank came back to Amsterdam. He didn't know if his wife was alive. He didn't know if his children were alive. He discovered about his wife, and he had to wait for quite some time to discover what happened to Anne. So he was left on his own. And he formed a trust. And that's how we know about Anne Frank to this day. And today you go there, and it gives you a very clear, you can actually go into the rooms of where they stayed. It's very poignant. If you ever get the chance, go. It's worth paying a visit. I think when I looked through some of the pictures, I thought, of all the pictures I found, I thought that one, it's just a mixed bag of people. And as far as the Germans were concerned, they were nothing. You can't believe that people would be treated like that, can you? Right. Now, let's get to 1946. This is a map, and I managed to find this, and I have the original paperwork as well. This is a map produced by the United Nations. This is the final map of Israel. It's quite interesting, isn't it? There's the figures. Okay. Jerusalem, and I'll bring that up actually, is under international rule according to the United Nations. So you've actually got 3 countries going here. So you've got Israel, the Arab states, and Israel and Jerusalem are separate. And those are the figures of the people who were living in the land at that time. So you can see that they actually segregated most of it pretty well. A lot of effort actually was made. I didn't realize just how much effort they put into trying to find out where everybody lived. So that's the original map. And unfortunately, as you know, there was a war. The Arabs invaded. The map on the right is the map after the truce. As you can see, they took more land. Well, I hate to say it, but at the end of the day, you've just been attacked by Arab states. Of course you're going to take land if you get the chance. It's one of those, it's just the consequences of war. It's not unusual. Any country, you could go back all the way through history and you will find Britain took a countries by war. Germany, Holland, it goes on. They're all taken. It's just one of those, it's just a fact of law, of wars. Right, people movements, 1948, 1949. I took a lot of time on this one because I thought I want to try and find out what's going on. Between 850,000 and 900,000 Jews were expelled from Muslim-majority countries. And I mean expelled. And some of them were killed. When this war kicked off between Israel and the Arab states, everywhere, the Arab states, all of North Africa, all the Arab states, a lot of Jews were killed, land was taken. In fact, there's legal disputes going on to this day. But 850,000 to 900,000 Jews were expelled. 200,000 went to Europe and North America because they may have had people there. 586,000 resettled in Israel. At the same time, the Arabs call it the Nakba, the Great Disaster. Well, it was a disaster for them because if they behaved themselves and accepted Israel, they would have prospered. 700,000 Arabs left, 150,000 Arabs remained, and they are there to this day. Facts of history. A quick rundown, not all the wars, but the ones of interest. 1970. This is an interesting one. You don't see this one mentioned very often. King Hussein of Jordan had 2 million Palestinians living in the land. The PLO had just captured and stolen those planes. Remember those planes they captured and they flew them to Jordan? I think it was 5 aircraft and hostages. Well, King Hussein realized that this was a major threat to the country. So after the negotiations to get the hostages clear, Jordan went to Pakistan, of all places. General Zia, you might have heard of him, he actually ran Pakistan for a while. Brutal man. He came in and they butchered 25,000 Palestinians and expelled a lot of them to South Lebanon. And guess what happened? The Lebanese War, Civil War, when the Christians were expelled. I don't know if you can remember, in the 1970s, you could actually go to the Lebanon. It was like going to Spain. It was a holiday. It was a holiday place. There's lots of brochures. It was an amazing place to go to. And it was prosperous. And it was a Christian majority country. It's not now. And the reason for that is because the PLO tried to take the country over. You wouldn't think it, would you? So we have the other wars, and then, of course, October 7th, which is still going on. Now then, who is living in Israel today? Well, there you go. Actually, I can tell you the figures are now, I just saw the figures the other day, there's now 10 million people living in Israel. Okay? So this is from 2023. 73% are Jews, 21% are Arabs. Non-Jewish, I love that, is Christians and Armenians. I love the way they put Christians and Armenians, because they're Armenian Christians, but that's how they put it. It's quite interesting. What's interesting, I couldn't quite get the figure for this, is how many Christian Arabs there are. But you talk to a lot of people and they say, oh, it's a Jewish country, it's full of Jews. No, it's not. The mayor of Nazareth is a Muslim. Nazareth is a Muslim majority city. And he is so pro-Israeli, you wouldn't believe it. His sons actually fight in the IDF. Yeah. Things are not quite as black and white as you see in the press. Here's an interesting one for you. I like this. This is Christian Arab border force. And it's got a Greek Orthodox priest. These are Arabs, they're Greek Orthodox. Astonishing, isn't it? You wouldn't think that you'd never see this in the press. And I think of all the pictures I've found, this is the most poignant. Jews and Arabs, his weapons down, and they're both praying. They're brothers in arms. There are a lot of Muslims in the IDF fighting alongside their brothers and sisters. There's a lot of Muslim women in the IDF. You wouldn't think it, would you? You wouldn't hear it on the news either, especially on the BBC. Ezekiel says, "And I shall gather them from the countries, and I will bring them to their own land. I will take the children of Israel, and I will bring them into their own land." There are lots of promises in the Bible that he will bring his people back. And we are seeing the fulfillment of prophecy. Astonishing. We are seeing the Bible coming true. Although it's a difficult time to live in, it's also an amazing time to live in. We're seeing this for ourselves. And again, "I will gather you up from all the nations and bring you home again to your land. And I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you. I will put my spirit in you, that you follow my decrees and be careful to obey my regulations." When you open your Bible next, understand that you're seeing the fulfillment. We're coming up to the end times. Right. Advertising. Didn't think you were going to get away without some advertising, did you? Okay, new day. Launch of our new website. Okay. There's our email address. You're free to go and look at it. The film's on there. There's the long one from Easter. And there's also there's lots of short films on there. We will have an interesting section, which I'm currently working on, is this one, 360 degree.